like it just went into it like that, and because it's been such a long time. Anyway, go ahead.
Yo, what up? This your boy Tim, aka T.O. Speaks.
And it's your girl Yami, aka Yams Be Saying, and you are now tuned into
Love and Theology.
I know I've questioned many things in this world, but I never had to question your love. So I know one thing's for sure. I can put trust in a real love, your love.
For every mom who ever missed a meal so they would have enough to let their babies eat.
Okay, so it's been a very long time.
How long has it been?
No, actually, at the time that we're filming this, maybe it has been, but it hasn't been a long time. For real. But, testimony time. Oh, we're going to have to post-edit that one. We don't have no testimony this time. Okay, so...
Our testimony should be done by now.
Right. Okay, so today we have the incredible pleasure of doing an interview with Latoya Cheathon. Just some background information on her. Latoya is a relationship coach and master's level therapist, specializing in working with couples who desire to improve their relationship. She completed her master's degree in counseling psychology at the National University in Sacramento, California, bachelor's degree in counseling psychology and theology from William Jessup's University in Rockland, California. And in general, she's also a really dope person. We'll have her link with her information for you so that you can check her out. But
I'm gonna tell you one thing I love about her. When she did that couples yoga, like in person, like that's something y'all should check out.
What
link
I
up
was
with.
trying to say is that we were introduced to her by our good friend when we were looking for a sexologist for an event that we were hosting at as a part of our responsibilities as the
marriage ministry leaders at Breathe ATL.
So what were you saying?
No, I'm saying when she came, she had a lot of dope insight. And you know what was so great about it? It was just the tip of the iceberg. So
right.
She just gave us a snippet of how dope she is. But one thing I really enjoyed was her, first she got some good information type books, some good literature that you can read. But secondly, the couples yoga, man. I mean, her practice really took you to another level of intimacy without the actual intimacy, sex part, you know. So
super dope. So we thought that it'd be super great to have her on for a conversation about sex. I think that what are we calling it? Let's talk about sex.
Let's talk about it. You know, it's be so taboo in the church to talk about sex.
You really do.
We need to talk about sex. So without further ado,
oh yeah, that part.
We now present to you the incomparable, the magnificent, the brilliant, the PhD.
To be.
Or
maybe at this time she'll be. No, yeah. But I think she's to be.
So put some respect on her name. Put a DR in front of that name.
Period.
Latoya
Cheathon. Or our conversation with her. What? Dr. Soon to be Latoya Cheathon. We are super excited that you, after all of our scheduling issues, still decided to partner with us in coming on to the Love and Theology podcast. For those of you guys who missed the introduction, kind of skip past it, we were introduced to soon. I'm gonna call you Dr. Cheathon because that's how I feel like you're gonna do that anyway. So
almost,
almost right. Dr. Cheathon, through a friend of ours, we were serving as the marriage ministry leads, and we were looking for a topic that we thought would be very important for like the people that we were kind of serving. And Dr. Cheathon was the person to go to discuss sex, conversations about sex, intimacy, and within the partnership framework. Right. So we thought it was apropos, Got to use big words when you're talking to a doctor. Right. Apropos to also invite her on our podcast, so we can have kind of information and insight into the discussion about sexuality, specifically for church folks, yes, but people in general, relationships, and all of that. So with that being said, soon to be Dr. Cheathon, can you just give the people like a brief who you are, how you kind of came into kind of going into like marriage and family first of all, and then sexology specifically?
Yeah. And thank you again for having me. I appreciate it. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I've been licensed for almost 10 years now. And I specialize in working with couples. And so since I was 12 years old, I knew that I wanted to be a relationship counselor. And I mean, I really got there because I was the kid in middle school who was giving everybody advice about their relationships and quoting all the STD facts and the importance of using contraceptives. Yep, I was that 12-year-old. So I just knew that this is the path that I was supposed to be going on. So that's what I did. I got out of high school, went to college with that in mind, and I went straight forward. And I needed to get a master's degree in order to be a licensed therapist. So I went through, got my master's degree. And then about 5 or 6 years into that, working out in the field, what I noticed is that I had a lot of specifically Black Christian women who were married, and they were coming to me telling me that they were having issues in their sex lives. And, it would usually be a couple because I'm working with the couples. So, the husband and wife would come into therapy and they would say, we're having issues related to sex. And the biggest common thing that I noticed is that the women tended to come from religious backgrounds, and they had a lot of shame around sex. So what that told me is that there's a need for us to talk about sex more in the community, and especially in the church, rather than it being something that is very taboo. So that's what led me to go back to get my sexology degree so I could help those couples. And I'm currently working on my dissertation. So that's why I'm just almost doctor right now, but I will be getting that done in the next month or two. And that is the topic of my dissertation, is working with women from that population.
That is super dope. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that, because when I don't know, I think I wanted to be a squirrel when I was 12. So ain't no telling.
Right.
You had your whole life figured out. And I'm over here like playing with Barbie dolls thinking like, oh, it's great. That's funny. I think, what was I going to ask? You have a question? Because I was going to ask something.
Well, one of the questions that I had in this field, this topic, like, what are some of the biggest challenges that you face with couples when it comes to talking about sex, or even having your spouse, or even talking to your spouse about things that they could do to please you sexually? Like, how do you help them bridge the gap to have that conversation?
Yeah, that's a good question. That is one of the most common things that I deal with. No matter what issues the people are coming in to address, most of them have difficulty talking with their partners about it. And, it really starts off early on in our lives. I ask each person when I'm meeting with a couple, I do one session individually with each of them. And one of the questions that I ask is, was sex something that was talked about in your home? And I get a variety of answers of ranging from, no, my parents would never have said anything about that, to, yeah, they talked about it at the dinner table every night. It was so inappropriate and we were all uncomfortable. So it does vary by the family, but it is evident that whatever people noticed growing up, whether they talked about sex or whether maybe if there was some shame around it or implied messages like, for example, well, just don't bring no baby home. I've heard that from people who said, my parents didn't tell me anything about sex. That's all they said. And so when my sister got pregnant, I didn't know what was going on, that kind of a thing. So, people, if they come from a space where it's not something that's talked about, or it's something that's an uncomfortable topic, then they're less likely to be open to talking to their partners about it, even if they're married. And so one of the things that I do to try to help them, really, it goes back to helping them to see where this comes from, right? To really notice, where does this pattern come from with me holding back or being uncomfortable having this conversation? What kind of shame is attached to that? And I think that once they recognize that that's what's going on, then they can be in a space where they can try to push themselves to go ahead and step outside of their comfort zone and try to have those conversations, even in a small format. Maybe it's, we talk about, I have one couple who does like sex talks weekly. One of the partners wants to talk about it all the time. The other partner's like, this is too much. I don't want to talk about it all the time. So they actually have carved out time in their weekly planning when they sit down and have their alone time where they actually talk about sex. And then they explore things. They listen to the podcasts and learn more things, read books, all that kind of stuff, but it's all focused around sex. So that's one way. And then another way is just noticing when it gets uncomfortable. So if they start talking about it and maybe they're okay at first, but then after, as it gets a little bit further down through the conversation, maybe it feels a little uncomfortable to have that conversation. It's okay to say, you know what, this is a little bit too much for me right now. I'm a little overwhelmed. So can we pick up on this later? Yeah. Or can we not talk about that? And maybe we can talk about other stuff, so just really being more aware of where did it come from, and then being more aware of what do I need in that moment to feel the most comfortable I can feel having this conversation.
I can understand that because usually it's Yami who's more aggressive than
what? Not you making me out to be an animal.
She have me in the corner balled up in a
lioness.
Wow.
No, I'm just joking.
Are you? Probably not. Were you raised in an environment where they talked about sex a lot?
No, and see that's the sad thing about it, because no, I wasn't raised in that environment. I remember the first time my mother found out that I was having sex, right? And what happened?
Hold on. Let's put a footnote in this right here. Because for as long as I've known you, it's always, well, I was a virgin when I met you. Meanwhile, he has a son that predates the relationship.
Anyway, I couldn't have told you that. That makes no sense.
You would always tell people, she took my virginity away from me. She said that. Anyway.
He keeps making you into the aggressor is what I'm noticing.
No, I was going to say, because I remember when she first found out, right? I remember, I think I got in trouble. But see, I'm going to tell you what I tell people. I had to do a form. I was talking about that with some teenagers one time. I said the biggest problem was that at this point I had sex. I wasn't, I caught the quote unquote feeling. It was going to happen again, right? What they failed at was not teaching me about sex at this point. So now that like I tell the parents all the time, like now that your kid doing it, don't shy away from it. Now you got to teach them. Yeah. You got to teach them about sex at this point. So that was one thing. That was one thing that we know. My family, we did not talk about. It wasn't off limits. It was just one of the things like, I'm not doing that with you.
I'm sitting here thinking about the first time I really understood what sex was. I was sitting in my anatomy class, 9th grade. In anatomy, they have a book which has pictures. And I see, like, the process. I see, like, a penis and a vagina, and I see it integrated. And I'm like, oh! And, of course, I have this revelation around people who are sexually active, and they're looking at me like, girl, really? I didn't know. I really didn't know. That was my first real, and, okay, let me not say first real, because in 5th grade, they had a little sex talk. So, yeah, but my real understanding of, like, what goes on. Maybe I think one of my homeboys at the time was like, what did you think happened? Did you think that we all just roll around like this? And I was like, I guess I did.
How did you get sexually aggressive then?
Wow.
Once you figured it out.
Right, it's the way that you're labeling me. Right? I just feel so targeted. Okay, another thing that I wanted to know is that soon-to-be Dr. Cheathon is also ministerially trained, right? So, which makes for the theological component of this episode even more profound. One of the things I guess I wanted to ask is, I don't remember the actual name of it, but that you remember there was a purity culture. That's what it is.
Oh, mm-hmm.
How much do you think purity culture has affected both men and women, specifically those who were involved in the church? I'll say this generation, because purity culture was really kind of, I would say, our generation focus, maybe. But how do you think that it impeded or affected or imparted, I'm trying to use big words, but how it affected us?
Yeah. You know what? So the purity culture, I'm trying to remember, because I've been doing all this research. Right. So I believe that was really something that started, I want to say maybe around the 80s. Okay. And so before that, I think that the way things were handled was that it was, okay, we're not going to talk about sex. That's inappropriate. And then it shifted to the 70s where it was like free for all. And then here comes, yeah, yeah, and then here comes the purity culture. And so I think that it impacted a lot of kids growing up in like the 80s and the 90s, especially. And you know, it as with most things, it affected men and women differently.
Yeah.
You know, it's because we live in such a patriarchal society, there's this there's this message that gets sent to men and women that's different. So, and I know everybody knows about it. We already know what it is. We've lived it. And so it's the fact that, or the idea that if a woman is having sex, then she's promiscuous.
Right.
If a man is having sex, or if a boy is having sex, then that's expected. You know, you're a man now, right? So that's kind of the message. And it also inherently causes additional issues, because now the women are therefore walking away with shame, right? They have to do things in hiding. And then they have this, if they're, let's think about some teenagers, the boy might be a little pressuring, like, come on, let's do it. Yeah. And the girl has to think about her reputation. Right. So that's kind of that part of it. And then it also led to a lot more of the shaming in relation to what girls were wearing. So kind of trying to control girls' bodies. Like, you can't wear stuff like that because then the men are going to look at you. Yeah. And, you know, I think that all those things together really cause a lot of anxiety for people growing up, women specifically. So I think that that's kind of what comes to mind for that. The purity culture, I'm sure, did impact men as well. I think that it probably impacts how they look at women. I don't know that it necessarily impacts how men look at themselves or their behaviors. But, you know, you got to bring a certain kind of girl home, kind of a thing. You know, everybody in the town can't have been with her, because then that's going to make us look bad, and that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I agree with that. I was actually doing, as a part of my thesis, I'd been working on kind of like the history of marriage in general. And one of the things I found was that the way that we talk about the aggressiveness, or men being the aggressor in these kind of circumstances, wasn't always talked about in that way. Like, if you go back maybe decades, right? Not even decades, let's go centuries. There are literal scriptures or sermons that detail how aggressive women were during that time and how they needed to get those things under control. So what we even like kind of portray as the norm for men wasn't always the norm for men. It was kind of reversed. And what I find is interesting too is that, or maybe what I'm concerned about is, and Tim and I have had personal conversations about how there is in tandem with the whole patriarchal society, there's this portrayal of what women should not be, or whatever, that comes from what I feel like the purity culture kind of projected. Because during the purity culture, ooh, Lord, I was getting real Baltimore. I'm not even from Baltimore, right? The purity culture also told women specifically, go get your degrees, get focus on school, don't have sex, don't be with no dude, and then the other side of it, when you do get married, bust it wide open.
Exactly.
But also, there was this portrayal of women as being masculine. And when they would talk about women being masculine, they would name all these negative kind of inflammatory things about men. So you're aggressive, you talk too loud, and I'm just kind of like, so is this how you feel about the brothers? Like how is that helpful to a relationship? Also, in terms of how it deals with like sexual, sex in marriage or sex in general, I feel like that narrative also kept men from being vulnerable with their significant others, because there was this ideology that they had to maintain. And you can maybe speak to that, and maybe you can also speak to, thoughts on that.
I agree with you. I think personally, even with the ideal of sex and exploring the body, has done men a disservice altogether, right? Honestly. So what happens is, like, I think in our culture, we glorify the rape culture, to be honest with you, in the man culture. You know what I mean? In a certain way, right? So we're supposed to go out and conquer these women. We become conquerors over women, right? And without even learning how to conquer ourselves and our flesh and learn how to respect the woman. So I think that the coaches, just the not having these conversations all together has done men. So what happens is now we can begin to deal with these feelings that we have, right? Mm-hmm. These feelings of these sexual feelings. I was talking to this girl the other day, and she was telling me that she called her.
Talking to this girl?
No. She was telling me about her son got caught looking at porn at an early age, right? So I said, "What you gonna do? I mean, what are your plans?" I said, "I don't think at this point it's don't punish him. You know what I mean? There's no point of punishing him. You need to talk to him about it." I said, "Because these feelings are not going nowhere. So what happens at this point if you don't teach him? He's not gonna have to know how to deal with these feelings. Now he's gonna go start groping girls on the butts, right? Because he's gonna learn from somewhere. It might be YouTube and all that stuff. So I think that we need to have these conversations, just like in the church. You know how they tell in the church, they tell girls to come in with skirts and all this stuff because they don't wear skirts or cover themselves up because it might distract the pastor or somebody trying to get the word. The problem is not that. I think the problem is that we're not teaching our men how to control our flesh when these situations come about. You know what I mean? So a woman should be able to walk past a man naked and he still be able to keep himself from groping this woman or saying lewd remarks to this woman. So I think that's the problem. I think all around that's the problem that we have. We just don't have an open conversation and allow men to be vulnerable or boys to be vulnerable in that space. And I think that's where we fail in young boys and men, as a whole in the culture.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of these girls, at least the girls that I'm around, that I'm raising, like including our kid and including just some of the girls in our kind of village, like these girls ain't they not being raised to be demure in that way, or passive in that way. It's very like, if you can't get it together, then we can't be together, kind of thing. Which I think it's going to run its course negatively, if we're not embracing or teaching both of our children, both men and women, young men and women, to kind of rise to the occasion in that way.
I remember I heard a pastor one time say, because at some point we all going to give in to our creature cravings, is what he called it. He said creature cravings, like having sex. Like, you're as a creature, we all want to have sex. I didn't have none of those. So, those were I'm saying, so just if you think about it, like all creatures. At some point we're going to give in to it, so we need to understand what it is that we're giving in to.
I agree. How does that impact how you like what you're studying? How does it, because you have children, so how does that impact how you maybe train them too? I assume you have boys too, right?
I do. I have a lot of them. I have 3 boys and a little girl. My daughter's the youngest.
Okay.
So, and my oldest son is already 21. So we've been through all of the stages pretty much, to get him there. So, I think the biggest thing that I learned early on, I actually just learned this in parenting early on, is the fact that when they bring it to you, yes, that's when you need to talk about it. But also, if you could try to get ahead of that, that's good. So, starting kids off young. I was watching an Instagram video, and they were asking men where a clitoris was. I don't know. Did you guys see that video?
I've heard of it, but I don't think I can point to the specifics, but I heard of that one.
Yeah, no, you know what? Actually, they weren't asking where. What they said, what? I think they said, "What is it?"
What is it? Oh, yes.
And these men were coming up with all these different things that they were saying, like, oh my goodness, just all different types of things that you could think of, but none of them were body parts. And so it was so interesting to me, but that's what I learned back then. Or I'm sorry, that's what I learned from watching that video. But I also learned a little bit about that when I was taking my classes for my PhD. Yeah. There's a lot of people who don't know anything about women's sexualities, most specifically. Yeah. I was talking to one of the girls, one of the other therapists in my class, and what she said is that she works with a bunch of doctors, and they were in a room, and the doctors didn't know, like the doctors who she was talking to, they didn't know what a clitoris was. Oh, wow. And they were actual medical doctors. So I don't know what their fields were, but it just goes to show that if we don't teach kids, then they don't know, or they go get the information in a not the healthiest way.
If I remember correctly, you said something maybe in our sessions about how to introduce sex to your children. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I may have. I do talk about that.
Can you speak on that a little more?
Yeah, you know, the biggest thing I'll say is doing it in an age appropriate way. So if you start kids off really young by and introducing them to things like body parts, right, and calling them what they're actually called instead of making up words like hoo ha and pee pee, right? Using real words. What's up with you? Why are you looking at them like that?
It used to be a whole pocketbook situation in our house, and I was like, call it by its name. The technical term is vagina.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, funny story too, right? So when we found out that we were having a girl,
Yeah.
right, we were sitting in the doctor's office with my legs propped up, and the lady said, "Oh, you're gonna have a girl." He was like, insert expletive here. My daughter's gonna have sex, and I was like, "So that's the first thing you thought about?" Which is probably why when she was she would talk. The conversation came up with regards to her cleaning her vagina. Hey, this is how you clean your vagina, blah blah. But like, you clean your pocketbook like this, and I heard her say it like one or too many times. It was something like it was asinine. It was pocketbook. It could have been hoo ha. Knowing your country self. So it was something like that, and it was just kind of like, girl, vagina, please. But continue.
Yes, yes. So you know I'll get off track with you. I just want to say that now that you're telling me this, I'm remembering that that's another thing that a lot of people don't know. That they call it the vagina, but it's the vulva that we're talking about, right? See, mind blown, right? The vagina is the cavity, right? So that's the hole. That's where the baby comes out, right? That's the canal, I guess I'll say. And the vulva is what's on the outside. That's what we see.
That's right.
And so teaching these things, I mean, because it's the reality of the situation is there's no reason that so many people in this country should not know what that means.
That's true.
But it's the case because we don't talk about
it. I did and I forgot. And I still called it the wrong thing.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I recently just found that out myself. I want to say it was in the last few years. I didn't know that either.
The Boulder.
Actually, the vulva. She has a book.
So basically, what I learned from that is that both of us was telling Tabitha wrong. That's what I learned.
First of all,
that's what he heard.
Right.
First of all, and meanwhile, I have the book that
I contributed to it. Yeah, I wrote a chapter for that book.
The word, yeah, you contributed to that talks about my vulva and me,
yes,
literally. And here I am.
That's okay. No shame. My point is just that this is the reason why we got to talk about it more. Yeah. Because a lot of people don't know, and if we don't say it, then people won't know. So that's what I would start with kids is really just starting them age appropriately. From what I've noticed in my research is that in other countries, that's how it's done in some other countries. And so it talks about some country, I think in Europe, I can't remember which one it is right now, but it talked about how they teach their kids from a very young age appropriate sex education. Mm-hmm. And so they start them off, with just the body parts when they're maybe kindergarten. So that way they know all their body parts and they know how to say no. If someone does something they don't like, they know how to say no. Mm. If you just think of that's where they're starting at. Imagine what it's like to be by the time you're 15, if this is the kind of education you've been getting throughout your life and it's been getting progressively more information as you go, you're learning more pieces to put it together so you can understand a little bit more what is sex, even what is that, right? What does act even mean? Yeah. As you learn those things and you kind of build on it, by the time you get to 15, you have very clear understanding of consent. You have a very good understanding of, oh, well, if I do this, then there's a potential that I might get pregnant. So maybe I need to use a condom or whatever. Right. But the challenge is that the American society hides and keeps that stuff stigmatized. And, we don't want to talk about it in schools. We get a little bit of, sex ed. Okay, you go to this classroom, you go to that classroom. We're going to give you some biology information and send you on your way. And people walk out of those rooms in elementary school like, I still don't know what sex is.
Like me.
Right? Yeah, it happens so much. And so really just getting back to making sure that we're actually giving people the information that they need, because that's what's going to set them up for success in their relationships when they're older.
That's very good. I think I probably, just again, to highlight the book that you contributed. It's called My Vulva and Me, and an anthology of stories for, by, and about Black women. Let's talk specifically about how this information impacts different races, if you have that information. Like, are there more races that are more kind of prone to having conversations like this more fluidly than the other, or is it highly more stigmatized? I think it's highly stigmatized in the Black community, and more so than other communities. Am I wrong for saying that?
I would say that in the Black community, it is more stigmatized than in other communities, for sure. I do think that there's other communities that are probably right around the same, the same amount as well. So there's other. I would probably group it into a category of who's the least comfortable having these conversations. The Black folks are going to be in that category. But I think there's also some other races that would be in there. There's some races that are probably even less comfortable, though. If you think about people who are maybe from an Asian culture, because in the Asian culture, typically people, they're not very forthcoming with having certain types of conversations where they're putting their business out anyway, right? And so it's not very likely that that parents are going to have a sit-down conversation with their kids about sex. Other cultures, though, like from what I've gathered, people who are from Jewish backgrounds are very comfortable talking about sex.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess that makes sense, because they
comfortable talking about everything.
Yeah, because they do like the reenactment of their history quite frequently. But I also like that, because that means that there's no ambiguity about who they are. Like, you know what I'm saying? They're very, like, this is where you come from. This is your history. This is like what we deal with. This is what we talk about. I like that, though.
I remember reading something in the Jewish culture. They said if you don't teach your kid about their history by the time they're 16, they consider that along the line as child abuse in their culture.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
They have to.
Yeah. So, culturally, it does impact things. But specifically with the Black culture, one of the things that I've been learning more about as I've been doing my research is that the purity culture itself is it goes across the board, right? Because it's really just connected with Christianity. And so whether someone is a white person who's a Christian, or whether they're a Black person who's a Christian, they kind of got similar messages about abstinence is the only way. Let's not even talk about anything else, because if you talk about anything else, you're just going to go to hell. So let's just focus on not talking about it and avoiding it. So that's kind of the message across the board. But one of the things that I thought was very interesting is that an additional layer that is on top of or that's on a Black woman would be the fact that the racism, the history of the racism, there's a book called My Body Is Not an Apology, right? So there's this additional pressure or expectations that are on Black women to even more so not be too revealing. And, our bodies are shaped different too. And so how does that play into things? And so so although the purity culture was there, they also have this additional part that's piled on if it's a Black woman.
That's good that you said that, because I think in a book by Tamara Lomax, I think it's called Jezebel, The History of Jezebel, or something like that. It talks about how Black women's bodies, from Mammy unto Sapphire, has been either used, abused, or demonized to project this notion that we were kind of very sexual, very forthcoming with our bodies. We were either very sexual or a mammy figure,
Exactly.
which was only used to really nurse white people's kids, kind of thing. So that's a very good point that I didn't even think. I don't think. I think about in terms of raising our kid, but I don't think about in terms of how I identify, and I don't know how it's not how to reconcile those things, but it's something that I think I do need to keep at the forefront of my mind. Now, I do think that there's more conversations within the Black community because, like, let's talk about the difference between vulva and vagina and whatever. I Melissa Fredericks, who wrote the forward for this book, on the Love Hour podcast, had a conversation about finding or identifying what pleases you as a woman in order to do that. And in terms of Christian culture, that's basically masturbation. Which was I don't know if it was a taboo conversation, but it wasn't something that I was bringing up to, Pastor and First Lady, my parents, at all, right? So let's kind of deal with a little bit of, I don't know, the taboo-ness or the not taboo-ness of figuring out what you like so that you can therefore speak to your spouse or your significant other about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Masturbation is something that has been shunned in the church community. And most of the time they use, when they're saying that it's wrong, they use the passage that talks about the guy who spilled the seed. I can't remember the exact Bible verse.
That's not what that means.
Yeah, but that's exactly what they talk about. They say that your seed is better off in the belly of a whore than to be spilled on the ground, something like that.
Which is usually taken out of context.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's because that's the only thing that they can find in the Bible that talks about it. So that's what they use. And then of course it's taken out of context. And I've heard sermons about this, how that was completely taken out of context. And that's not what that was talking about at all. So it's something that's been used to shame people. And if sex is something that we can't talk about, then how are we ever going to unshame ourselves for it? We can't ask anybody, we can't. And then if we're in our community and we ask our friends, they've all been given the same messages too. So it's like we really do have ourselves in a space where we have to think outside of the constraints that have been placed around us and really learn more about, like, well, what does this mean? Doing the research for ourselves, reading the Bible for ourselves and seeing what it is that it says, rather than being like, oh, well, I can't do this because of that. But once you get past that part, I think that the idea of the question of how do you learn more about yourself? One other thing that I'll say real quick about that is that, they have videos of babies masturbating in the womb. So this is something that happens. Oh, yes. Well, and I say masturbating because I'm just literally meaning like touching themselves.
Yeah.
Right.
That is interesting.
Yeah. It's something that's a natural thing. When we touch our bodies in certain ways, it feels good. The problem is that when we do that and someone finds out about it, they throw a lot of shame on us for it. Right. And then it becomes something we can't talk about that. That's not right. You don't do stuff like that. So I think that causes a lot of issues. But if you really think about it, a lot of kids do touch themselves when they're growing up. It's a natural part of life, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that is one way that they're learning about themselves and what they like. And as long as no one comes along and shames them and tells them you can't talk about that with your partner and all of those things, then they'll have that information and they'll be able to continue to add on to it.
Yeah.
A lot of people do. When we met for the event, we had a sponsor there, someone who was selling toys, and I know that's another topic that comes up a lot. Like, well, right. What about toys and how do people feel about that? And is that right? Is that wrong? That whole thing. I am not a pastor or anybody who's going to be telling you what is right and what is wrong. I'm going to tell you to go ask your pastor. I'm going to tell you to go ask Jesus. I can't be in. But, Jesus. But what I will say is that if something is being used in the context of the relationship, if that is something that's being done inside of the marriage bed, then I'm of the opinion that whose business is it?
Undefiled, my God.
Yeah. So, I mean, trying new things, exploring new things, being open to learning new things and trying them. And if some don't feel right, just say, this doesn't feel right. I don't like this. Or can you move a little bit over here to this side? Whatever it is, but talking, the communication part is so big. And when that's not right between a couple, when their communication's is off, it's often difficult for them to have these kinds of conversations.
That's good. That's real good. I'm of the belief that it's more than just communication; it's comprehension too, right? Because a part of understanding, like whether or not you something you do to me feels good, is also respecting or understanding that understanding what I mean when I say that. Like, it's not an indictment on you if I'm in an uncomfortable position, like especially now, 30s, 40s, I can't hold my leg up as long as I used to. You know what I'm saying? So like, put it down and let's switch it up some. Come on. Does this make you feel uncomfortable?
No. I would rather you just be quiet and let me do what I gotta do. I don't care how you feel.
Wow. She's like, that would make me feel comfortable.
Patriarchy at its finest, ladies and gentlemen.
Let me do what I gotta do.
Right. Are you kidding me?
I have a good question though. Like, with what they call it, non-binary people or people that explore homosexuality. How do you explain it? Do you get a lot of those type counseling sessions, or when you're trying to explain them their sexuality or what they're going through? Like, 'cause the truth of the matter is, we're starting to see that more and more, right? More and more people coming out with it. So how do you deal with that in that space, and how do you have a sensitive conversation with the whole world bashing them for who they are? Well, not the whole world. I'm gonna say the church world most of the time, bashing them for who they are and what they believe in. So how do you have that conversation and then make them feel confident in what it is they feel like they're going with their sexuality?
Yeah. I do have I have worked with a lot of same gender couples. And I have not worked with very many non-binary couples, or people. What I do in my role as a therapist is I take what I can take, what I feel like that's a area of expertise for me. And if it is outside of my expertise, I do not mind referring to someone else, because I know I have a lot of connections with a lot of people who would better serve certain people's challenges than I would. And so I haven't dealt with that, but I have had a lot of couples who've come in who are of the same gender. And I honestly meet them where they're at, and I just support them through whatever it is that they're dealing with, just the same as I would with any other couple. Right. I'm a believer that, you as an individual knows what you need and what would make you feel good. And if you don't, then we can explore that, and you can kind of try to figure out what it is that makes you feel good. But that's an individual task, And so if it's something that is that's coming up where they're like, I just don't know how to do this in relation to what I've been told or things that I've been taught in my past. I don't know how to kind of reconcile this. I'm going to be standing right next to them as they're trying to figure that out. I'm never going to come from a space of, well, this is what's right and this is what's wrong or anything like that, because that's just not my role.
I think that's really good. I think you got to have more people that's able to have that conversation instead of support them instead of judge them. So I really applaud you for that. So that's really good.
Yeah, got to help people find their way. I'm not here to lead anybody. I'm just here to help people find their way.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Which is actually a form of leading. I know you be running away from this whole ministerial thing, but baby, that's minister right there. That right there. Huh?
I'm going to tell you, when I called her, when she said, look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. Ask Jesus. That's what most pastors need to do. Go ask Jesus.
Go ask
Jesus. I do agree that sometimes in these spaces, especially pastors, are having these conversations that they need to refer out to. It's just kind of like...
I think oftentimes in the church, the reason they say no, don't do it, because it's easier to say no than explain something that they don't know how to talk about.
Yeah.
So that's what they defer to. No, it's wrong. It's a sin. Most of the time, it's probably not a sin. It's probably that you don't understand what it is.
Or you're uncomfortable with it.
Or you're uncomfortable with it, right?
Right. You're uncomfortable with having a conversation. And I think most people, specifically this... I'll speak for the millennials. I'll suggest that this is the same ideology of the Gen Zers. Millennials kind of started the trend of why Why?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And Gen Z's was like, you're gonna have to explain this to me. Right? Or like get somebody else to do it. That's them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I like it, and it's not enough. It's not enough. I know specifically for our kid, it's not enough to be like, well, you can't do it. I think about
Oh, yeah.
Tabitha when she was 3. Tim used to do like these affirmations with her. You know, I'm smart, I'm strong, I can do
Beautiful,
anything.
I can do anything. Every day,
yeah, so whatever. At 3, she goes to her dad and she said, "You know what, Daddy?"
No, she asked if she'd do something the night before, and I told her no.
Okay. She obviously woke up with that in her heart.
So so I'm trying to get her ready to do her her affirmation. So she stopped and said, "I don't want to say I can do anything I want to, because obviously I can't, because last night you told me no." She was years old. Well, like, man, you made a good point.
But that's the kind of generation that is coming up, and honestly, I support it. I endorse it. It is challenging to be a parent of like that kind of, because ideally, I mean, as much as soft, gentle, whatever parenting you call it, you want to be. You know what I'm saying? At the end of the day, I need you to do what I ask you to do and get it out the way, so I don't have to have this conversation with you.
I would say even with Tabitha, like she starts to understand her body now. So yesterday she took a shower. I go inside her room. I should have knocked. I guess at 8 years old, I got to start knocking now. So she landed on the bed naked. I said, "Tab, why you ain't got no clothes on?"
Shaming our baby.
She said, "I just want to be naked. I'm in my room, my door closed. I just want to." So I said, "Okay," and I closed the door.
Meanwhile, her dad is the same way. Like it's not like oh, nobody in our family walks around.
I'm not even gonna lie. So I felt like, dang, did she pick that up from me?
Yes, she did. You were the same way. Tim used to say, "When I die, bury me in my birthday suit." I was like, so how do you think? Like you're saying this around like our kid. And you think our kid is like, well, oh yeah, I'm in my room.
I'm gonna tell you, because my mind goes to the worst case scenario. I said, dang, she's gonna be walking around some boy naked one day. That's just how my mind.
Right back there.
I want you to know, even to this day, the girl asked she don't ask me. She asked her daddy for what she calls a sleepover, which is them sharing their queen size bed together, right? So I was like, and in my mind, I was like, he was telling me this today. In my mind, I'm thinking, you don't think this is like a setup for her future. But okay, whatever.
It's the sleepover, like it's sending the message like it's okay to have a sleepover with boys.
I mean, I don't thank you. Me on the same page.
My point
it's
though
not the same, is it?
My point though is that she is adopting a comfortability, with sleeping with another gender. So I just feel like you should be okay with it.
I don't believe that translates the same way.
Okay, well, we'll see. We'll visit this conversation in like 15 years. Especially because it's not like we wasn't jacking up anyway. So, I mean, there's so many things that... Are you still uncomfortable?
I can't agree with none of that.
Because it's your daughter.
Right, that's right.
But I'm somebody's daughter too.
Okay.
This is true.
Nobody cares about that, huh?
No.
Nobody cared about that when you were ravishing me, huh?
I treated you gentle and kind.
My mom is watching this podcast as we speak. But I really appreciate. Did we get all our questions out? I don't think we did. But we got most of them. Yeah. We really appreciate this conversation. I think that we'll probably ask you to come back on at a later date, and hopefully you give us the same fee that you gave us today. You know what I'm saying?
I don't know, my rates might be going up.
Listen, I get it. Also for them, but not for me. Okay?
Yesterday your price ain't today's price.
But one of the things that we like to do at the end of an episode is what's my theology, and what my theology basically is like. What is our summary or understanding? Kind of like you a minister, you like I know. I get it. So it's kind of your 3 points, at the end of a sermon, if you will, just to kind of summarize what your thoughts are about. Did you ask enough questions about men in this space?
I think we just flowed, man.
Okay. Well, I mean, hey, that's fine with me. My producer hat was just kind of like, also hit the questions, but also maybe not, so that we can get you back on.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Keeping all of this. So 3 points.
I will tell you this. I do want to invite you to to speak with the men in the marriage ministry, just the men, you know. So I think that we have there's a lot of questions that men have that they're ashamed to ask in front of their spouse. I noticed that. So so I would love to have
we did have that conversation about getting you back. We still need to do that.
I mean, because people loved you. You was a hit. I tell you that.
No, it really was. Really was. Got really.
I appreciate that. It's so nice to hear that. Yeah, I'm looking forward to coming back. Yeah, I'm definitely down to come and talk to the men. Like you said, it's not only do the men have the deficit of not being able to really, or not necessarily feeling comfortable having the conversation with their spouses, but it's not like they can really talk to their friends about it either.
I'm often just say that, you know, the worst thing I have seen in those spaces when men trying to give other men advice on the woman's body and what they expect, it's horrible. It's just like, oh my God, you really think that what we should do to them? Like,
now I'm concerned.
No, I'm just saying some of the advice is like, Jesus Christ. Like, what did you learn that from? You learned it from some dude on the street because your parents wouldn't talk to you about it. Like,
what you got to do is grab her by her locks, take her down.
Hey, club them over the head and drag them. You
Wait
know?
a minute.
I mean, I'm sure you had experience with that. Like some of the stuff that we say as men, probably, I bet you like, oh my God, don't do that.
You know nothing about women.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
But also
and not just about sex talk, but just in general.
Right? But to be fair, there are a lot of things that maybe we don't understand too about, and I'll say this about, because it was a conversation, maybe I saw it on TikTok, about how like these prominent, religious figures wasn't getting the church girl. They were getting, the not church girl, right? Or the girl who had been, influenced by the church, but not necessarily conditioned by the church. And like all these church girls are like, they told me I had to be pure and a virgin, and the pastor, that ain't who he want. You know what I'm saying? And there is something to be said about giving us all the information so that we can collectively be, a better service to each other. That's, partnerships, relationships, marriages, it's a servitude to one another. And I don't think that, especially in terms of sex and sexuality and all that has been enough of the conversation. It's been roles and gender, blah blah, bull, whatever. But it hasn't been. I'm literally called to serve you in this space. You're literally called to serve me to the space. As long as when I fill up your tank and you fill up my tank, both of our tanks are full, and that includes sexual.
Yeah.
So
I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
How important do you feel that sex is in a marriage? And I believe we can end it on that. Like, how important is a healthy sex relationship in a marriage?
Well, if one or both partners want to have a sexual relationship, then I think that it's very, very, very important. And I say it that way because some people choose to live in a sexless marriage. And so I don't want to make it seem like there's something wrong with them if that's what they choose to do. But if one or both of the partners want to, for example, have more sex or try new things, I think it's important to honor those things and try them with your partner. So, yeah, I think that having that intimacy, having that connection with this person who this is the only person you share that with, that can be very, very connecting for a couple. And without that, it can drive a very big wedge in between the couple.
That's a very good point.
It's really good. I love the way she answers questions. I love it.
I know she's like a touch of doctoral.
No,
and
it's so good because
regular schmegular.
One thing I've noticed about you a couple times that you never force your opinion. You know what I mean? You want to see, and that's what that's what we need more. I think what happens is oftentimes in these spaces we force our opinion on what we think and try to give it to everybody else. But I appreciate about you. So
this is my opinion, but that's what would make her an effective minister. I'm just here's me forcing my opinion.
Okay.
No, but I really do.
And I do because I want to give voices to the people who don't get heard often, because we really do a good job in our society of shaming people for doing something different than whatever the norm is, whatever the category is. So I'm very passionate about making sure that I do bring voice to those who may not be heard, because there's so many situations and scenarios and opinions and perspectives out there. And I think that by learning and hearing or by giving the space so that people can share, then we have the opportunity and the ability to learn.
I love that.
Everybody has something to teach us. But I do have 3 things since you asked me for them. So I'll give them to you.
Yes.
3 things. My 3 things. First of all, talking about it when people are young, with the young people, not being embarrassed. That's how we're going to try to change the dynamics of what's going on. Oh, I'm sorry. One more thing I wanted to say earlier. Just real quick, going back to the research about the people in Europe versus the people here, and the talking about it. Teen pregnancy rates in the United States are like the highest.
Yeah.
And we're the place where we don't want to talk about it. And when you look at places like the countries that talk about it and provide this sex education in a non-judgmental way from a very young age, those kids are so much less likely to get pregnant by the time when they're teenagers.
Wow.
It's crazy. And so, I mean, if you just look at that, we're hiding information to try to prevent people from doing what we don't want them to do. And they're doing it anyway, hiding it, and then getting STDs and getting pregnant and all the other stuff.
Oh, you just gave me a sermon. We are sitting there hiding, trying to keep people from whatever information about just in general, the outside world, the sin of the world. And that's the thing that's driving them to it.
Exactly.
You be out here just preaching.
That's it.
You just be out here preaching. I just love it. I live for this. This is good.
All right. So that was that one. So talking about it when they're growing up, that's what's going to change the next generation. Number 2, I wrote down, so important to talk about it with your partner. It might be uncomfortable, but still approaching the conversation gently and in a safe space when you guys are in a good place, not when y'all in the middle of an argument or something like that, throwing out, well, I'm tired of you doing this. You won't put my leg down. That's not going to be helpful. So
bring it up. Okay, got it. Don't bring it up the next time I'm in an argument with you. Period. Got it.
Yeah, but just creating a safe space between you and your partner where you guys can feel comfortable being vulnerable. That's when you talk about these types of sensitive topics. But the point is just to make sure you're having the conversations. Mm-hmm. So many people don't have these conversations, even with the person who they are having sex with, who they've been married to for 30 years. They still don't talk about it because it's uncomfortable. So stepping through the discomfort, doing what you need to do by having those uncomfortable conversations, that's what's going to help going forward. And then lastly, do your research, right? There's so many books out there. There's so much information available online, people providing sex education. You can learn how to do whatever you feel like you want to work on doing better. You can learn it online, and through books and stuff like that. And just learning more about like the stigma that I was talking about. What messages did you hear growing up? And how do you think that those messages show up in your relationship today? And really like doing that deep dive within yourself to learn more about that. And then you can come out on the other side working on releasing that shame and getting it back to what God wanted it to be originally.
Come on, God. Wow. You better go. This is so good. What's your theology?
My theology is that, just when it comes to talk about sex, just be open and talk about it. The body is not taboo. Sexual is what God created, as the pastor, doctor, psychologist said.
We are forcing this past the narrative on you.
But no, sex is not taboo. The body is not taboo. It's something that God created to be beautiful and enjoyed. So that's my theology. What's your theology?
I agree. I think that we have to have more conversations like this. And create, I want to, even in our relationship with our kid or all the other kids that we have, or not even kids, people, right, that we come into contact with, I want it to be such a norm that nobody is kind of tensing up when this conversation is happening, so that we can all have, productive sex lives if that's what we choose to have. Right. So I agree with that. I agree. Did you wanted to give another theology or your theology or something else that you want to kind of summarize with?
That's all I had.
That's all you had. Well, thank you so much. Soon to be doctor. Maybe by the time we post this, she'll be doctor. But soon to be doctor. You never know. Latoya Cheathon, tell us about. I told them about your inclusion here. I thought I had the other thing around here, but anything else where they can find you, how they can support you, how they can solicit your services or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I will share my card deck.
Yes, we have those.
Love my card deck.
You have the cards, yep.
Yes, and so these are available on my website. It's just latoyacheathon.com. There is so these have 3 different topics inside on these cards, and one of them is the topic of sexual intimacy. So if anybody is interested in improving their sex life with their partner and they want to ask some questions and do some activities, these are the cards for that. Yeah. So I have that, and then you guys can find me on Instagram at the Couples Wellness Spot. That is my IG, and I put all kinds of relationship advice, sex advice, those kinds of things for people to look at and learn more on my page. And hopefully, well, what I'm planning on doing in this next season is incorporating more sex education too, because that's definitely needed, as we've talked about for the last little while.
Please and support. She has really good, like there was this during the holiday season, conversations about how to protect your boundaries when dealing with families. That was kind of a very big thing that you were doing throughout the holiday season, which I thought was really imperative. So it's not just sex, but relationships in general, because she is was an LMFT.
That's right.
So licensed marriage and family therapist. So just she has a gamut of things that I think are very helpful to relationships.
Well, they say just a wealth of knowledge.
Oh, you so say. You
just
so say.
Just a wealth of knowledge.
You love the Lord so much. So yeah. So y'all make sure y'all support her, follow, like, share, subscribe, tune in, solicit her services for everything.
Right. We all need it. We all need somebody to talk to the teachers, man. We all do. We're never too old to learn.
Exactly.
I can teach you some stuff. I'm gonna teach you tonight.
This is where the conversation just turned.
I feel like I should exit the conversation. But I like that you guys are having these conversations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Virtual hug.
Thank you this was so good. I hope you enjoyed it.
I know I've questioned many things in this world, but I never had to question your love. So I know one thing's for sure. I can put trust in a real love, your love.
For every mom who ever missed a meal so they would have enough to let their babies eat. Fathers who grind every day to provide more than good advice. Charlie Sheen, take it, everything you gotta take to bring the bacon home and put it on the table. You are not forgotten, legacies are made in our darkest hours. God is watching, keep your faith. Don't bend, don't fold, there's a lyric I quote. Tell me trouble don't last always. There's a Christ I know who revives the soul of the one who lose their way. Pursue the one who promised us a peace of mind. I tried to fly high on my choice of vice, but then I found Christ was the road to life.
Many things in this world, but I never had to question